in the future, one of the places where there will actually be bipartisan agreement is, I think indirectly, it will have serious effects on labor, but the sort of willingness now to face up to the threat that China represents is going to have some pretty dramatic impact on reshaping supply chains, on reshaping how manufacturing and labor work, particularly in the United States. I think a lot of the outsourcing that has gone to China is going to be reshored in fairly short order, given the fact that both parties are now realizing what a threat China represents.
Well, look, and aside from China being an adversary and all of that, and I'm a little uneasy with some of the rhetoric that I'm seeing, and it seems like an area where Democrats and Republicans are united. The rhetoric, I don't want it to lead toward an actual war with China. And I feel like Biden has been irresponsible with some of the things he said. Like, if China invades Taiwan, we'll have boots on the ground. Don't say stuff like that. That's incredibly stupid. But in terms of the manufacturing issues, the supply chain issues, I'm very happy to see that politicians are finally waking up to the fact that we need to manufacture things in the United States. I mean, this is one of the failures of, Venezuela's policies. They stopped manufacturing things, started importing everything. And once oil prices went down, and oil, of course, is their number one commodity and export, they were screwed, right? So we experienced how insanely fragile our supply chains are. We need to manufacture jobs here in the manufacture products and bring jobs back here to the United States. I like that we're headed in that direction to some extent. The CHIPS Act is a good example of that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I think there's certain specified industries, chips are obviously one of them,
right,
where they actually implicate national security. And so you are going to see some right-left coalitions that are sort of odd when it comes to reshoring, that sort of stuff.
Same with pharmaceutical drugs, by the way.
That's true. Yep. Any stuff that has been manufactured in China heretofore and that seriously impacts national security is going to be reshored. Much of it's not going to be reshored in the United States, by the way. A lot of it's going to end up in Vietnam. Some of it's going to end up in Thailand. Mexico. You're going to see a lot of this stuff go to other places on the globe. And, the sort of countervailing point to the we need to reshore everything is that autarky has essentially been a giant failed economic strategy wherever it's been tried. The idea of all manufacturing happens in our country. All products must be produced from within. That generates economic failure. I mean, one of the reasons that Venezuela has failed is specifically because it is essentially economically isolated and self-isolated. I mean, they nationalized virtually all of their industry, and they prevented people from being able to own even within their country. I mean, there's foreign direct investment basically dried up. There's no money going into Venezuela. I mean, there's half of the story that's been told when it comes to the American economy about stagnating wages. The other half that has not been told is that what you get for your wages now is way better than what you got in 1980. I mean, that is just a reality. You would not wish to live in 1980. As opposed to now. You now have a refrigerator, you have a microwave, you have two cars, you have a...
Sure, okay, so if you want to talk about the technological advances...
Well, I mean, the stuff that you have for your money, aside from two specifically government-subsidized areas, healthcare and education.
There's a lot of crap. Okay, so look, honestly...
Would you rather live in 1980? Like that standard of living?
In terms of the quality of products that Americans could buy, I want to go back to the 1950s. Okay, I'm literally...
Cuba's right there. They still driving those cars.
I completely stopped buying new clothes. Everything I buy now is vintage, made by American garment workers in the 1950s. And those garments, by the way, look like they're brand new. Brand new. Quality. Like what we did...
But the percentage of salary that you would have to spend on that is much higher.
That's true.
So for the worker, you're not shopping vintage shops from the 50s. You're going to H&M.
But understand. So what happened with, especially, this was what happened in the 1970s. We started offshoring jobs and really focused on consumerism, right? So wages started to become stagnant. But Americans were okay because they can rely on cheap products that are made in other countries through exploited labor, right? So we have a bunch of cheap crap we can buy, sure. But the quality of the stuff we're buying is not there. We have to replace it after. I mean, look at clothing in particular. You buy clothes in America that, by the way, were made in some other country, in some factory or whatever. You wash it, falls apart the next day.
I mean, that's true, but the percentage of your salary every year that you're spending on clothing is way lower than it was in 1980. And when you talk about sort of the economic narrative of the 70s, there's a countervailing point of view, which is that heavy unionization, high labor costs in the 50s and 60s, and a time where literally the rest of the world was physically destroyed by World War II, gave us a head start, which we then blew over the course of the next 2 decades, to the point by the 1970s, we have a decade of economic stagnation with literally no stock growth from essentially 1963 all the way up till the early to mid 1980s, you have 20 years where your stocks don't actually appreciate in any serious way because the economy basically stops dead. We're getting outcompeted. The American car companies, which are the crown jewel of American industry, are getting outcompeted by Toyota and Hyundai. And by the 1970s, 1980s, we're importing all of those cars. That's not because we offshored to them. It's because we didn't offshore them. It's because
we totally did offshore. Maybe not to Asian countries. We offshored a lot. I mean, think about the Rust Belt, right? And all the manufacturing jobs that went to Mexico.
The offshoring happened later. That offshoring happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Correct.
That was an aspect of attempting to compete with the import of cars from other countries. I mean, Toyota becomes a world power in terms of being an actual global corporation because our manufacturing costs in the United States are too high. We're living fat and happy off the excesses of the rest of the world being destroyed, essentially. And because of that, we could afford to do all this. We were the only game in town. And then we weren't the only game in town. Suddenly, Japan rises from the ashes and is an economic world power and is outproducing us when it comes to cars. And so you have two choices at that point. Either you go tariff, right? You actually start restricting imports and you generate enormous costs for your own citizens who are now having to spend more money.
Right.
Or you have to start offshoring and competing and lowering the wages. And so that's essentially what happened in the 70s.
I would go on the tariff route for sure.
So right. So I mean, and Trump, right? So Trump, right? I mean, this is sort of that right-left horseshoe that's been happening. Obviously, I wouldn't because if you just, again, I will go back to my original point. I don't think that you'd be willing to have many takers who would be willing to go back to 1980s level standard of living. From 2022. We have a for as much as we can talk about the excesses of Amazon, we now live in a world in which you can take a device out of your pocket, you can hit a button, and any product on earth will arrive at your door in 2 days.
That's true. And look, that's part of consumerism, and it would certainly be a culture shock for Americans to rethink whether or not they need all of this stuff that's made in other countries.
So that's the honest trade-off.
Yeah,
and I appreciate the honest trade-off.
No, and I am being honest. And look, I acknowledge that people might not agree with me. Most people might not agree with me. But for me, I, in my personal life, have become a lot more happy in rejecting that consumerist mentality. When I spend my money, I spend on quality items that are going to last. And I just feel better about my purchases knowing that it was made, at least at a time, when people were unionized, when they were actually making living wages, they were succeeding, they were able to buy homes for themselves and their families. I want to go back to that. The fact that most Americans now are not able to buy a home in America is insane. We need to figure out what it is that's leading to this. Well, we know why we have this inequality, what we can do to lessen that economic inequality, because we want more Americans to actually enjoy that slice of the once American dream.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.